Hello and welcome to the Building Community and Maximizing Engagement Through Adversity breakout session. My name is Melissa Schrett and I'm the 2018 Teacher of the Year for ESD 113. I'm a teacher in Olympia School District in Olympia, Washington. My co-host.
I'm Shanoa Mahar and I am the 2021 ESD 123 Regional Teacher of the Year. I teach in Kennewick, Washington at Sagecrest Elementary Kindergarten. Welcome.
We'll be your host for the session. Assisting in the session is also Stephanie, who has her screen blank so she can run the technical aspects of this. And we'll be monitoring the chat. I'd like to introduce you to your presenter of the session, the amazing 2020 Washington State Teacher of the Year, Amy Campbell. She works at Helen Elementary in Camas, Washington. She's a special education teacher who has the unique ability to always focus on the students' strengths and draw a community of support around them. She is one of my favorite people to learn from, Miss Amy Campbell. Woo!
Oh, thank you folks for having me here today. And I'm going to share my screen and then tech people, if something goes sideways, go ahead and let me know. So as Melissa shared with you, we are here to talk about building community and maximizing engagement through adversity. And this last year was so hard. I think before I even go into the things I want to share with you about what I learned, what my students learned, how we navigated this pandemic, I want to just acknowledge all the work, all the effort, and the struggle that happened. And just the way prior to the pandemic that we knew that our educational system wasn't fully seeing and serving all of our students. All of our students weren't experiencing all the opportunities they would need to thrive in a school setting or to access all of the learning or engage in meaningful ways. We knew we weren't 100% prior to the pandemic. During the pandemic, we are 100% aware that there were populations that didn't experience the same opportunity, access, engagement. This didn't work for everyone. Everything we did didn't work for everyone. But what I'm hoping to talk to you about today is some of the things we did during the pandemic that helped with engagement and building community for some students that we can take forward into the future so that when we go back into our buildings, or if you're in your building, I'm not going to say go back to teaching because we have been teaching the whole time, no matter where you were or how you were doing it, that we can reach a broader spectrum of students. We've got more tools now. And I want, before we forget what we've done that's been successful, I want to really engage in that conversation. So I'm so excited to be here today at the WATAC Spring Conference. And just to give you a picture of the kind of thinking we're going to do, I was looking back at past conference, or I wanted to look back at what happened in the past conferences, who were their keynotes and what were they talking about. I'm going to click on this link and navigate away from my presentation and hopefully we'll make it back. But I went to the WATAC website and I wanted to see, who was there and what were they sharing. So let's scroll down. And I realized there was a difference in 2020. 2020, the pandemic had hit. They'd planned for an in-person conference. I was going to be the keynote. There I am. And we had to go virtual. We didn't get to see people in person. And I remember the heartbreak at that point. Like I was gonna go present in to people about things I was passionate about. And it didn't happen in exactly that way. But here's the recording of what happened. So it's available in perpetuity, whether I like that or not. And here are the past presentations, and they're not clickable links. So even though I'm just love the content that Robert Hand shared, I can't go back and see it. you had to be there. You had to be in the room where it happened to get that. And I think that is just a taste of what this pandemic has brought. Like today, we are being recorded in a webinar. If you like this, you can share it with your friends who don't have to be here right in this moment. That the way we're doing webinars, the way we're doing school provides these new pathways. And so that's really what I want to talk about today. I'm going to present one more. Let's see. So as Melissa shared with you, my name is Amy Campbell. My pronouns are she, her. I am the 2020 Washington State Teacher of the Year. There's my email address if you have questions or ideas, and my Twitter handle in case you want to follow. I share a lot about disability rights and advocacy and special education. So I'd love to connect with you on social media. I know in the break or in the opening session, they shared a land acknowledgement, but I want to acknowledge that I am coming to you from Camas, which is located on the traditional lands of the Chinook and Cowlitz people, and that the Chinook are still fighting to be federally recognized on their own land. I also want to just share with you a little about what brought me to where I am today, Teacher of the Year, but really just my passion for inclusion, my passion for disability rights, and my passion for public education. And so this is just a little of the Amy Campbell story. 13 years ago, I got hired in Camas to teach students with significant disabilities. And I thought I knew what I was doing, right? I had a graduate degree and I was certified to teach general ed and special ed, and I knew a lot about disabilities and I knew a lot about teaching. But I was in a portable, and so I was very isolated, and so were my students. I had some ideas that, first of all, we had to be safe, we had to have fun, but also I had ideas that before we could go into the building and be part of that community, we had to learn how to be learners. We had to learn how to follow the rules. We had to learn, there was a certain amount of learning we had to do, or changing we had to do, or fixing we had to do before we could be part of what was happening within our buildings. And I had a few experiences that really changed the way I was thinking about education, and especially special education. So the first was WASP portfolios. And WASP portfolios they call them something else now, WAAIM portfolios, but they were the alternative assessment for students with disabilities at the time. And I went into this training for the first round of WASP portfolios, and I'll never forget the presenter. It was a bunch of life skills teachers in a room together. And the presenter at the front of the room said, all right, everyone, we're going to give this test. It's going to be a reading, writing, and math test. And it's based on grade level expectations, or the Common Core, as we call it now. And everyone in the room was just like, you don't know our kids. You don't know what we teach. How will they ever do reading, writing, and math test? But I'm not someone who is easily deterred. And so I was going to go and do the thing I was tasked with doing. And what happened was, I'll never forget, there was a moment, I had a 5th grade student who has autism, and we were trying to teach about fractions, and I'd given him a whole, I'd given him halves, I'd given him quarters, and manipulatives that he was playing with, and we were talking about it and rearranging. And he pointed down at his pieces and he said, the 3s? And I was like, the 3s? And I realized he was looking for 3rds. And I realized that he was understanding that you could have a whole. You could break it into 2 pieces. You could break it into 4 pieces. All of these pieces could come together to remake the whole. And if you could do 1 piece, 2 piece, 4 piece, could you also not do a 3 piece? And I realized in that moment that my students were being limited not by their disability in that situation, but by their opportunity that I had provided them, that I had never even shown him fractions to know if he could do fractions. I had a deep learning experience right there where I realized that opportunities in our schools are so often a product of the way we imagine capacity or the way we imagine capability or interest or engagement. And so my moment there was my program really shifted, and we really started working on how do we teach kids these academic concepts that maybe if there's a way to help them access the learning, new and different, tangible, auditory, physical, however they learn and engage, can we get them this information? And so my program started to look a little bit different at that point. And then I had, moving forward a couple of years, we were becoming so academic. It was amazing, a very academic program for individuals with disabilities. And I will never forget, I walked into an IEP meeting with a parent. I was so excited to share how her student was doing the reading, the writing, and the math. And she said to me, Mrs. Campbell, the mom said to me, Mrs. Campbell, all of that is great. Like, I can see that you are doing an amazing job, and my son is too. But you are isolating him. He's segregated. And it, again, my heart sunk as the conversation then became around what is community for him and how do we want him to use these amazing skills that he has. And he has these amazing interests, and so do his peers in the general ed. And how are we leveraging friendships based on shared mutual interests? How are we seeing him for his ability to contribute and allowing gen ed kids to see that too? And how are we creating a feeling of belonging for him? And so that conversation also really impacted me, and it helped me set the stage for the new, the continuing to move forward, the changing, the shifting, the evolution of my program at Helen Ballard, which has taken a strong focus on inclusion and the benefits, not just social inclusion, but academic inclusion. And I love these two visuals, and I think prior to the pandemic, I used these visuals and they meant one thing. Now, we're not even post-pandemic, but in the pandemic, they continue to mean and different things to me and look different to me, and I experience them differently. But I love the picture on my left, I'm assuming your left too, the idea of diversity. We have all these pieces. Our students are coming with different experiences, different assets, different interests, and then we bring them together into our classrooms, and you get these puzzle pieces that connect in different, unique ways to each other, and they make a bigger picture. When I looked at this again this morning, I was seeing my Zoom screen, right? Where every day I kind of get the puzzle piece picture with the faces, some cameras on, some cameras off. And how do I make sure that all my little puzzle pieces are connecting with each other? And how important is that? And then this other image on the right that I really like, which speaks to the idea that we have exclusion where some kids aren't included at all, separation where we have maybe two parallel programs. I think this is sort of the program I was running early in my career. Integration where we have students just in a general education classroom, but not necessarily fully connected and seen by their peers and teachers. And then inclusion where everyone is learning from each other and about each other and with each other. And the thing that I like to share when I imagine this picture, and as we talk about inclusion in our classrooms, that the general education populations in our classrooms are not as homogeneous as this circle image, this graphic would have you believe, that the red dots in our room are not this similar. And I think I saw this so clearly in the pandemic as I was out in general ed in general education classrooms, in Zoom meetings. You can see the different experiences of our general education students. It's so broad. And then students with significant disabilities, we're extending that spectrum of experience. But it is definitely a spectrum that we have children who bring all kinds of things to our classrooms. And as teachers, we are capable of serving beyond homogeneous red dots, that we have a lot of tools in our belt. And I think the pandemic has highlighted a few more and also has given us a few more. And so on March 13th, this was all, you know, my previous learning in the pandemic, or previous to the pandemic. Mrs. Campbell, going to go recognized as teacher of the year, going to go talk about the benefits of inclusion and how we're going to build it. And then March 13th of my year of recognition, I was actually still in my classroom teaching. I'll never forget it. Schools closed in brick and mortars closed in Washington, but school was not closed. We were still there, right, educators? And really the impossible happened. I didn't come up with this idea on my own. I was in a webinar with Robert Hand, 2019 Teacher of the Year, and he spoke very eloquently about, we've always known that all of our students don't have the technology, the Wi-Fi, the food they need to thrive in our schools. We've always had kids in our schools who have needed to do research, and they've used their cell phones or type papers, and they're using their thumbs outside of a Starbucks. We've known that technology and access to internet has been access to technology and access to internet has been problematic in our system previous to the pandemic. But then suddenly there was this reprioritization on March 13th that we needed to get something to everyone. And of course, I can recognize that we are still not even there yet. There are a number of kids who do not have technology. But really, there is some power in understanding that when it was really prioritized, we as educators and as systems were able to make some quick change that made a big difference. So his thinking around, if we can really prioritize what we need as educators and put on some good pressure, we can make some big shifts pretty quickly in our system. And so I did put the link to the webinar there if you're interested in hearing from some other past teachers of the year. And we'll share that again at the end about how we can reimagine public education. But we had to get technology to everyone on March 13th. We had to figure out Wi-Fi. We had to feed everybody, right? And there was this realization that even though we'd never maybe considered in the past that maybe working from home was a viable option for some people. And I think these considerations are still so relevant and things that we need to consider as we move forward. And I think this was a super hard thing. I want to just call out that in this moment, hopelessly positive and imaginative Amy Campbell, I had a really this was a hard day for me. This was difficult because I had to understand and imagine that as I was putting Chromebooks in the backpacks of students with significant disabilities and thinking, I need to teach in a new way to them, I also had to disrupt my own thinking, which was, is this even possible? Right? And so that leads into I had to have different objectives in 2020. After that day, I had to change the way I was doing school for my kids. Not only were we doing it remotely, my goal now wasn't inclusive academic experiences the way it had been. I had to change gears. And so there was new learning, I think, for teachers, families, and students. And I was trying to create this graphic as I was thinking about, if we're going to teach online, if we're going to do remote options, what are the things we need to consider? And I realized that I needed to learn there were so many things I didn't know that were available, and I just didn't know how to use the learning platforms, the learning management systems like Google Classroom. There were teachers in our school using Google Classroom, but I had just never done it. Had to learn how to use that. I had to learn how to schedule so that my kids weren't expected to sit in a Zoom meeting all day, how to engage them. And this is so great. Engaging kids in Zoom meetings took me a while to figure out how to do it. And I spent a lot of time in Gen Ed Zoom meetings seeing what was working for Gen Ed teachers. And what I found was the things that were really engaging were the things that other kids were doing that were distracting, like getting super close to the camera and derailing a whole meeting. So those were the things I was doing as a new to Zoom teacher. And I think I've carried some of those engagement strategies back into the brick and mortar school. And I had to figure out how to maintain community in this strange new setting. Our families had to learn so much, and I hadn't thought about this until I was writing this slide, that I had families where I was doing home visits and having conversations about how to, they'd never had a laptop or a Chromebook in their home. So now we were talking about how to even turn on a device. Like, how do you turn on a computer? How do you log in? And when I'm talking about click on the waffle and look for the envelope, that's how you're going to get your email. Of course, we were going to have a really rocky start, as there was a very big learning curve for families on how to even support their learners. But going forward from that, this is as we bring new students into our community, we have to reteach, but my families have built a lot of skill around how to use these online resources. And then I had to get family strategies for supporting their students at home. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And our students had to learn how to self-start. They had to learn how to self-advocate. When you have a question in class, it's a whole lot. It's a very different experience trying to get your question answered. Like right now, I can't see any of you. I'm presenting. If I was in a conference hall, I would see as hands started to come up or people started to have their eyebrows come up, I could call on you, and I can't see any of you right now. So everyone has to learn how to use the chat box or the Q&A, or email the presenter after to get their questions asked. And it's a different kind of self-advocacy. We had to teach our kids how to learn from videos. I had to learn how to do all those things. So as I'm reflecting on all the things I had to learn and had to teach as we moved into this new setting, I reflect on the things that changed lives. And one of those things was strategies that support success. I've been teaching special ed for 13 years, and I know I have a lot of teacher tricks, right? The accommodations and the modifications I implement, but also the positive behavior supports and the token boards and the visuals that we use and the first then and the marble jars and the movement breaks. Suddenly our students were out in their homes, and things that I'd shared with families in IEP meetings that I do that support their students, they had only ever heard about. So I had to find this way of sharing with families strategies that support their students at home. I created a website, and I think a lot of teachers did, where I just warehoused videos. I didn't make these 2 videos, but they were game changers for my families that showed how to make a visual so their kids could see the order of the day, how to make a calendar, how to implement a movement break. And I think that was huge learning for some of my families. Very helpful as they were able to say, like, oh my goodness, I've heard you talk about this in meeting, but I had no idea what you were talking about. And it absolutely works. My kid just needed to stand up and dance for a second. So these are a few things that I taught about. And I thought, if we were I would love to do a chat alert. If there was something you taught families that is something you are going to, that helped them support their learner, that you're going to do forevermore, you could throw that in the chat box, because I think these are the things that I want people to be able to remember, they want to teach forward. So that would be, if you had something great you gave your teacher trick that you gave families. I'm going to move on to another one that I created, and this was really powerful. I have students who have IEPs. Oh, someone added one. That's good. Pull it up. A toolbox of strategies with videos just like this for our families. Yes, yes, yes. Oh, I love singing time videos with Heidi songs. Yes, that's exactly it. And how do we carry that forward? Like, we didn't, I don't want to lose that. The ways that we share the things that work to support kids, teachers shouldn't be the keepers of that, exclusively the keepers of that information. The one resource I created, and it just has been really exciting for extending learning into homes, was for my students' IEPs, I did an IEP breakdown where I told about the IEP goal, or I copied the IEP goal on the left side, and then I gave examples. You don't have to be the teacher giving specially designed instruction in the classroom to practice this goal. You can practice steps leading up to this goal, practice this goal, any part of this goal, by doing these fun activities at home that don't necessarily feel instructional, but will build your child's understanding. And so I started sharing these in IEP meetings with families, because I wanted kids to get opportunities to experience applied learning throughout their days as much as they could. Like, we can make progress, but we're going to have to do it together. Parents, here's how you could do it. And what happened was the general education teachers really gravitated towards this document, because it was beyond just an IEP. It was like, oh, these are the ways we could also engage students in learning. And so I think, as I'm aligning, I mean, this is another thing I'm going to take heading forward, but I think if you're a gen ed teacher, being able to ask the questions, when you're considering inclusion, what sort of activities can I do with this student that are really going to move them towards their IEP goals? And you could get maybe a very discrete list of skills that would be helpful. But also, as teachers, how are we helping parents feel empowered that they don't have to fully understand Common Core to be able to provide instructional opportunities for their children at home? So that was a ton of stuff we were doing in 2020. We were fully remote in Camas, and I think across the entire state. And then summer of 2020, we were planning for the pandemic and moving forward. And there was 3 things that I think really came out of conversations around how are we going to teach into the 2020-2021 school year in all these different variations of in-person, hybrid, online. What do we really need to know? What do we really need to consider? And these considerations were considerations prior to the pandemic, but the pandemic really highlighted them for us. And I want to make sure they continue to be the considerations we're making as we move forward, which is, what are the learning standards? And we have these huge lists of learning standards, but how are we prioritizing those learning standards? Because what we were finding out with the limited opportunities to really directly teach children in, whatever capacity you were, is that we as educators needed to be identify what we really needed them to know, so we could go deep and provide some practice and some experience, so that we weren't doing all the standards, but maybe the prioritized standards and getting more experience within those. So I think that's a conversation that has, as a special education teacher, has been really powerful for me, as I know what is the priorities in our classroom so I can align IEP goals. And general education teachers, it gives a little bit more peace as we're building our experiences for our kids. And then social emotional learning was really important. When we left school in 2020, left buildings in 2020, we already had classroom communities established. And so coming into a new year, we needed to figure out, how are we going to connect students with each other? How are we going to build community? How are we going to create shared ownership when some of our classrooms looked really different? And I really think this conversation needs to continue to happen. I'm going to share a few things that we did, but understanding that providing like the genuine value in giving students space for their voice so that they can share their experience and they can see each other, how powerful that was, and how we can really leverage that as we move forward after this. And I think equity became a large part of our conversation. Equity was a part of this conversation leading up to the pandemic, but in the pandemic, we really needed to make sure we were not just providing everyone access. And I'm not even sure we were able to get that. We know there was disproportionate harm during our pandemic and different experiences and opportunities. But how are we really ensuring in our school system that every child gets a chance to thrive? And so it brings me to where I ended up on the first day of school, which I started with kids on site on the first day of school. And it wasn't all the kids. It was an A group, an afternoon group, and a morning group. And I was rooming and zooming, teaching online and teaching in person with a lot of PPE. We had, I want to just make sure everyone's aware that our district invested in N95s and shields so that we were protecting students as best we could, but we were having conversations around who is the farthest from social justice. We built a lot of great experiences in 2020. As a teacher, I learned how to teach students with disabilities online the best I could, and yet I wasn't getting they were not getting all the experiences they needed to make adequate progress. And there were students who we could identify as needing something different, needing something more. And this idea of social justice within our communities, we're having these conversations, and I want to keep having them, the understanding of equity, that when we're considering equity, it doesn't mean that everybody gets the same experience every time. And it's okay. Like, we need to be able to make sure each student gets what they need to be successful. And this wasn't easy, and I know there were students who could have benefited from in-person experiences that weren't given that. But as we consider equity moving forward, these are the kinds of hard conversations that I think educators are going to be having. I also had to learn how to collaborate and schedule, because we were moving into Inclusion 2.0. We learned all these things in 2020. We all had Chromebooks, and my students had learned how to learn online. And now I was ready to move them back to Gen Ed experiences. And our Gen Ed students were in a full remote model at the start of the year. So what we had were asynchronous experiences where the videos were made by general education teachers or special education teachers in a video editing platform, which was really interesting, because then the student had control of the pace and the place that they could watch the video. They could watch it 16 times. They could back it up. They could, rewatch pieces. They could pause it as many times as they needed. And it was really nice because my students could have access to lessons. If they were having a rough day and they missed a lesson, that's okay. That lesson still exists. We can go back and do it whenever we want, and they can do it in my room with more support. This was a really nice consideration. And those videos still exist, which makes me so happy, because I think we made so many instructional, in my setting, we made a lot of instructional videos, and I'm going to be able to keep using them moving forward. And then we also had these opportunities to use a variety of learning platforms. And I have a story. So this student who's sitting in this picture, I tried to do back of the head. He's a 5th grade student, and he is in a synchronous learning experience with his peers. And he learned in 2020 how to engage in Zoom videos, Zoom lessons. He'd had a lot of practice to build stamina. And so here he is in a 5th grade meeting with his friends, and they're learning together. And then they got to make a flip grid. The flip grid was a me bag. It was where they were going to share something about themselves at the beginning of the year. And so he did that homework at home with his family. And I think it was really important that the shared, or the video that he and his dad made in the flip grid, because I don't know if you've done a flip grid, but you get, every kid goes home and records the video of themselves and their me bag, and they say, oh, this is my favorite kind of cookie, and this is my pet, my dog, here's the picture, here's my mom, that's my sister. And then they can comment on each other's videos. This student, if he had made the bag with me at school, I think I would have, I'm not sure what I would have picked, maybe different things, but making the video at home with his dad, he was able to have very authentic representations of who his family saw him as, like, and how he wanted to share himself. So he had his chewy fidget, and he had a piece of pizza that he tried to eat on video, and he had his tablet, and he could tell you about the videos he was making. And as I was watching these 5th grade flip grids, and the students were engaging with his video and getting a very clear picture of who he was, and because of the asynchronous nature of this, he'd gotten to make it at home and didn't have to live perform it in a classroom with other people. He could do as many takes as he wanted and then post the one he wanted. It was really validating to see their responses and their very clear connection. I love pizza too. I had that toy when I was growing up. I love making YouTube videos. You're just like me. And it was like, how are we leveraging asynchronous experiences moving forward that allow our children to really be authentic in the space they're in? I saw a lot of power in that. And then the synchronous experiences my kids were sharing, like he's sitting in the Zoom meeting now, that they have a variety of ways to give and get information. And I'm going to just go over those two things a little more, and then we'll do another chat on how you're using it. So if you used video instruction, maybe you did it differently than I did, but I made a lot of videos for my students, and my paras did too. And we went over skills that we wanted them to have, steps on their IEP goals, those training videos for families, strategies. They also got the general education videos in the learning management systems that they could watch in my classroom. And we were focusing on short and engaging so that the pace and place was controlled by the kids. And of course, you can always, I love this, you can talk 6 times faster than you can type. That's absolutely true for me. And what I'm finding is that so many of my videos, I'm having they're still in my learning management system, my Google Classroom, and families are just going back over and over. And they're like, man, we watched your folding towel video, we watched your doing dishes video, and we watched the calendar video way too many times. But, and for my students, I think that's comforting and gives them information. But our general education students too, it's been really interesting as a student needs to relearn a skill, how I'm seeing 5th grade students or teachers reshare videos with the practice video they had created. And so I think, how are we going to make sure that if we've created video content that is good, high quality, engaging content for kids, are we able to get this to students in a meaningful way? And in the future, going forward, and develop the banks, maybe in the websites of videos for families and kids. and the videos were great for families too. They can see the language we're using. They can see how the Common Core works. They can see what the actual product we want kids to have is. And when a parent would email a question, it is easier to send a video back. Here's the lesson. Synchronous learning time is really about, I think we saw it so much this year. This is our space for building community. We now know when we're all in the room together, in the Zoom together, we need to make sure we're engaging with each other and we're sharing about each other. And it's not just teacher voice, it's student voice, because that's what's going to bring our kids back to class over and over. And this has been powerful, even as our students, our family, or our classrooms move back into hybrid. I have students who can't wear masks and participate in general education classroom for all the activities. But just being able to have gen ed teachers now who have the capacity to say, hey, I'm going to turn on my Zoom in the morning meeting, then I have kids joining the Zoom meeting with the hybrid classroom in the morning. Or if somebody's not feeling well and the read aloud is happening or someone's not on site, then being able to turn on that Zoom meeting has really been a game changer. So are we using these Zoom opportunities to extend our classrooms outside of our classrooms? And I'm getting close here. So I'm going to skip through those two slides. Were more about engagement, but all the things I'm already talking about, like creating jobs so that we do have reason for kids to raise their hands in our spaces, and making sure that we're using games and making sure that we're building in opportunities for talking to each other. And that took a lot of time for us in our school to feel safe, sending kids off to breakout rooms together. And you're like, I don't know what they're going to say. I was co-teaching in a 5th grade so many times, and you're like, all right, we're sending them to breakout rooms. But it feels a little, we had to remind ourselves. So we send them out to recess every day, or they go to the bathroom together. We have to have trust in our classrooms. And I think we learned a lot of that. And our kids were able to build community with each other in their breakout rooms. We built community for our families and caregivers. And this was just the most important thing for me. Last year and this year in the Zoom reading, this is one of my students in one of my calendar times. And being able to support a family in modeling the use of the devices that we use with students all the time. I'm coaching, she's working to try and get it to line up, the students attempting, and on the screen are a bunch of other families who have students with significant needs as well, who maybe are also working on these same kinds of challenges with their students. And it's so powerful to know that all these Zoom meetings where they shared space with each other, when she finally got that switch lined up and he was able to share his answer, and it took a little bit of time and she was a little nervous, all the parent thumbs that came across the screen supporting her, community that she'd never had before the pandemic, and now they all know each other and they connect with each other. I think that's something I just am not ready to give up as we move out of this pandemic. Like, it is hard to teach online, but how am I creating online spaces for my families to connect with each other and support each other and build safety with each other? It wasn't everybody's experience, but some of my families shared with me that they had always been nervous about IEP meetings and coming into the school. They didn't know what they'd hear about their kid, and they hadn't had a great experience when they were in school growing up. But all the meetings they spent in with me on Zoom, they felt a lot safer in a public school. And I thought, if our families feel safe in schools, our kids will feel safe in schools. And so how are we ensuring that by extending our classrooms into home, we're actually extending we're reaching our hand out to families to invite them into our schools? Professional collaboration changed a lot during the pandemic. And the really exciting thing, I think, is we have a broader reach. I've always felt pretty isolated as a special education teacher who works with my students are 1% of 1% of the population, and they matter, and I matter. But it's always been hard for me to find community with teachers who do what I do. And I think teachers in general, we're in our classrooms, and maybe you have your team, but we're working a lot and we're working hard. And Zoom meetings has allowed me to collaborate with people outside of my school, outside of my district, even outside of my state. I got a text message from Nate Bowling this morning, and he's in the United Arab Emirates. And he said, I'll see you in 30 minutes. And I was like, there's a broader reach. And I think that that's something we need to keep in the back of our mind. Also, asynchronous collaboration has been a game changer. I don't know if all of you are using shared Google Drives or whatever platform you're using to be able to say, hey, we're going to do something at the end on a Jamboard. Everybody put in your piece when you're free. And some of us work at 5 a.m. and some of us work at 11 p.m. And that's okay, because we're all adding our information to this sheet, this slide, this data collection platform whenever we need to. We don't need to be in a room together. And I think that's, as we're collaborating going forward, that's something else we need to keep in mind for our kids and our families, that we're all functioning on a different schedule. Access to community meetings has been, like I said at the beginning, it's great in some ways and it's heartbreaking in others. I want to be with you all in person right now, and here I am in a webinar, which is what we get. But board meetings went virtual in our school district in September. And suddenly families who don't have childcare could show up at a board meeting and have their voice heard, because they could do it from their kitchen at home with their kid in the other room. And I want that forever. I pushed hard to have this rooming and Zooming experience for our school boards, because we want to make sure that we're having these meetings where decisions are being made, that every stakeholder has the opportunity to be there in whatever capacity they can, because now we know it's possible. I attended the Washington Education Association Rep Assembly, and it was sad. I wasn't in a room with other people, but I think about the hybrid experiences. There were many school districts there who said, we've not participated, as fully as we are this year, because there's a certain cost with sending delegates to farther away places. And so when I think about, if cost is prohibitive, how do we bring people? If people need childcare, how do we ensure access? In our schools, we know we have teachers who could teach if they could teach from home because their kids were there, and yet and they didn't have childcare options, and then having to be on site was a struggle. So considerations on where we're working from, where we're teaching from, all of this needs to be a conversation moving forward. Do we value the work that's happening remotely? And I think we do. I really do. And then I want to finally share with you some research that and the link will be in the chat at the end, that from Brookings. Beyond reopening schools, how are we going to emerge stronger from COVID-19? This page is emerging global trends. There's too much on this slide. I'll tell you that right out front. But this article goes through, we know the pandemic accelerated educational inequities. People who had high-speed internet and access to tutors will do better will have a different experience coming out of this pandemic than people who are already experiencing poverty, who are already struggling. We had inequities before, and this accelerated some of our educational inequities. But some of the other trends, it moved getting technology into our classrooms and into our system from the margins of our considerations right to the forefront. Also, a huge rise in public support for public education. We now see, the whole public sees, schools are important. We are doing a lot of things. We are feeding children. We are seeing children. We are providing social emotional supports beyond just academics. We know what's happening when we don't have the brick and mortars open. And so I think that there's a huge amount of public awareness, and we need to be able to leverage this in this moment for support of public education. You see how important we are. We are a hub for your community, and now is the time to invest. And I think we also see, coming out of this pandemic, all of our new educational allies, the agencies who have stepped up and who have supported families and who have collaborated with our public school settings to ensure access for students. And I think, so this article presents that these are 4 things that came out of it, and that we have a lot of ways that we can leverage what we know happened moving into the future, that we can take a focus on using the technology and the community and the awareness we have to build it stronger tomorrow, because this is about creating access for all our kids. Like at the beginning of the presentation, I said, we knew what we were doing previous wasn't getting everyone. We know what we did during the pandemic wasn't getting everyone. And now we're going to have opportunities to create better access for everyone. We're removing the barriers. We're changing how kids learn, not what they learn. We're learning that we weren't lowering standards or expectations. We were just doing things in different ways. And we can continue to do this. This is a graphic that I like, a comic I like, that is traditionally used to talk about accommodations and the idea of shoveling the ramp first. How do we make sure everyone has a clear pathway? If we shovel the ramp first, the student who can't use the stairs can get up, and everyone else can use the ramp with him. We can just clear one path for everyone. So I have 2 pieces that I'm going to leave you with. Don't forget to wave. This is a 5th grade, I'm going to cry. This is a 5th grade teacher, and he was teaching hybrid for students who couldn't be in his class. And he was opening those Zoom meetings every day and inviting students in. And then every day he would come down to my classroom and he'd wave in the window. And it was such a reminder. I couldn't see his face with the mask, but every one of us was reminded how important it was to be in space with someone else and feel acknowledged. I have kids in 2 quadrants on the playground, one on the play structure and one over on the soccer field. They can't play with each other, but we can wave to each other. I wave at everyone now. You walked into this meeting and I waved at you because it's acknowledging, it's validating, it's seeing someone. And I think as we're having conversations around equity and difference, that something we can all do is acknowledge the existence of another human and wave and welcome. So as you're building community going forward, adopt waving, like Amy Campbell, and who ends their presentation on consider the NFL draft. I was listening to OPB radio way too early in the morning on my way to work on Thursday, and they were talking about the draft. And they were saying one of the first major public events that went virtual last year was the NFL draft. And suddenly this major experience where usually a whole room of people come together and do a thing that's done very traditionally and well loved over and over and over for many years in the past had to be completely put online. And it was a hard decision to make, but they did it. And then this year, they had to do the draft again. They get to do the draft again. And there's this opportunity for in-person drafting. But what they realized was that America actually had really loved parts of that virtual experience. That when cameras were in coaches' houses and they saw the kids and they saw the furniture and they saw the family and they saw Bill Belichick's dog Nike, that there was a piece of that, those experiences that America still wanted moving into the future. And so on yesterday, during the draft, Nike made an appearance because America still wanted to see into these homes and understand the people and get to have a piece of something new that they'd experienced. And I think our classrooms are the same way. We have kids, we've shown them something different, a new way of learning, and we don't want to take that away from them or ourselves. So that's what I've got. I ran it closer to the end than I thought, but I wanted to give you Katie Novak calls it a win experience, a what I need time. And I think Stephanie's going to drop the links in the chat. So you have a second now, if you'd like, to pick one of these three things to dive deeper into. One is the research article, and it's long with the information on moving out of the pandemic. One is a YouTube video for a conversation with the teachers of the year regarding moving forward in the pandemic. And you get to hear from Nate Bowling and Mandy Manning and Robert Hand and Camille Jones. And I'm already, Brooke Browning, the new teacher of the year. And then one is a Jamboard. So if you have an idea, if you're loving any of this or connecting to any of this, or you have an idea you want to share, click on the Jamboard and go ahead and add a sticky note of something you're going to keep in mind moving out of this pandemic to reach students who benefited from some part of what happened over the last year. So I'm going to click on the Jamboard link and hopefully we'll get a few people adding a sticky note with their ideas. Oh, there's mine. I'm going to ensure all students have access to technology. March 13th, I didn't know that giving a Chromebook to everyone was going to change my life and theirs. So if you've never used a Jamboard before, off on the left-hand side, there are some functions, and one of them says sticky note. It actually looks like a little Post-it note. You can click on the sticky note and it'll bring something up, you type, and then you hit save and it'll pin it right onto our Jamboard and everyone can see it. Oh, here comes sticky notes. I'm going to keep sharing my YouTube videos as much as it sometimes makes me nervous. Oh, I love that. Educational opportunities extended. Consider having afternoon and evening classes for high school and middle school. Yes, different times of day. Learning new technology, always. Yes. Don't forget to wave. I am not kidding. I wave at strangers now. I'm on the trail and I think it's hard when you hear there are people who are very excited that you acknowledge them. And you have that opportunity. This is amazing, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop my share. And I think we're right at 11. So
I just have a brief little blurb I need to read real quick.
Yes.
When you're done.
Go ahead. I'm good. I just want to thank everyone for hanging with me.
Thank you, Miss Amy. It was wonderful. All right. Thanks for coming to this session of the conference. We encourage you to tweet something you heard that resonated with you. Remember to use the hashtag WATAC2021 and WATeachLead. You'll have 15 minutes between sessions right now. Take a quick break and stretch like we all need to. And we'll see you back here at 11:15. And be sure to refer to your agenda online for your links. Thank you so much.